Welcome back everyone to the React in-depth series. What we're going to do in this video is go over a bunch of exercises together to get more practice with events in React. We looked at events in the previous video to get a bit of an understanding of how they work in React and how they're slightly different from just regular DOM and HTML events. But most of the time we saw they're relatively the same. We're going to go over a bunch of exercises here to get more practice with that concept, specifically in the context of React, so that we can actually build up on this as we start making our components more and more complex. Let's get right to the exercises together. All right, so as with before, to start, I have a whole bunch of exercise files ready to go. I'm going to read through them, give you a chance to try it out after just like a quick break. But also, if you want, you can either pause the video or you can grab these from the GitHub that's in the description below if you don't actually want to just read it and pause it, whatever is easier for you. But I will be narrating each of these so that we can kind of go through it a bit slowly together. So for the warm-up, what I have here is I'd like you to create a new Vite project for React. So that we can actually go through these exercises. And as with before, I'll probably mention this one or two more times before I just stop at some point. Feel free to reuse the same project instead of creating a new React project for each of these exercises if you like. And that'll become easier as we go, as we start looking at things like composition. But especially in this video as well, it definitely takes a lot of space and takes a bit more time to just constantly be setting up React projects all the time. It takes a lot of storage. So just kind of reuse the same one and just switch around the components that you're actually using. And I'll show you how here as well. So to start with the warm-up, create a new project. And then inside there, I'd like you to create a button.jsx file, which is going to be a component. And I would like you to return a button that when you click the button, and the button should have the text click me inside of it, but when you click the button, I want you to log out to the console using console log hello there. Okay, so when you switch over to your browser and you open this up and you click on the button and you have your console DevTools open, you'll see that hello there, hello there, hello there printed out, depending on how many times you actually click that button. And you got to make sure to export this function and import it in the right places. And we've seen that in previous videos as well. So give that a shot yourself, and then we'll go through a example together. Okay, so to start, just as before, I'm going to actually make sure I'm in this folder. I have this folder open in VS Code. I'm going to run npm create. I'm going to use Vite, and I want to use the latest version of Vite. And that's going to prompt me for a project name. So I'll just call this events exercises, and I'll press enter there. It's going to ask me for a preset. I'm going to choose React, and then it's going to ask me for which language I want to use. I'm going to say JavaScript. Once I've done that, I'm going to switch over to that folder. And if I look in there, I have all my stuff. And then I can run npm install. And while that installs, I'll make sure I open up this folder, which is right over here. And I have my exercises just as JavaScript files outside of this folder. And in there, we should have our source folder with our main.jsx and our app.jsx file. And our node modules are getting installed right now on the side as we speak. So I'm going to open up this main and this app over here. And then once that's done installing for the node modules, I'm going to run npm run dev. And if you ever forget what program or what script you need to run, if you just open the package.json file, you can see most of the time it's going to be listed here. So it's actually just running Vite behind the scenes. We can also build, we can lint our project and preview our project. Most of the time, we're just going to be using dev, at least for the purpose of this course. And I'll show you what build does in future videos. We looked at it really quickly in the intro video as well. So that said, I'm going to close my terminal there just to have a bit more space for you since I'm so zoomed in. I'm going to go to app.jsx. I'm actually not going to be using this. I'm going to go to main.jsx. I'll just get rid of this index.css there just so that we don't actually have it. I'll just comment it out so you can see that I'm not going to be using that since I don't want it to actually show. I also realized I should probably open this up and open up the actual project here. So I'm going to command click or control click on that URL that it gives me, zoom in a whole bunch so that we can see that loaded up. And I'm going to open my terminal just so I have it ready so that I can actually see things being logged out nicely there. Perfect. So that's all of our divs, and here's our console as well. So for this first one, we wanted to create a button.jsx file. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go into src. I'm going to do button.jsx. Now make sure to name your files that are components with capital letters, as well as the functions in those files. That's both a convention and how React can actually tell that this is a component and not just a regular function. So we're going to call this a function. I'll call this button. And in here, I want to return a button element. And in the button element, I think we said we wanted to say click me. And I want to make sure I export this. You'll kind of get in the rhythm of this the more that you do this, where it's kind of like you create the component, make sure you export it. Most of the time we're going to be exporting it as default, but there are times where we won't, which we'll see in future videos as well. And we want to export that button. Great. So that's fantastic. Now what do we want to do? Well, we want to make sure that when we actually click on this button, it actually does something. So actually, before I do that, what I'll do is I'll switch over to main.jsx and I'll import button from /button.jsx. Make sure you have the extension, since we're using ES modules and not just regular kind of node syntax here. I'm going to replace this app here with this button, just like that. It's a fun word to say, and I'll save that over there. And if I switch back to my page here, I should see button. I'm trying to figure out why it's centered. It's probably because why is it centered? I actually don't know. Maybe it's because I'm importing app. Yeah, so if I import app, app also imports CSS. So it's actually running some CSS there. So I just commented that one out as well, since we're not actually using it. So the CSS doesn't get imported alongside it. So once both of those are there, we should see our button there in the top left. Great. And if we open up the DOM, we should see there's our button. And if we click on the button, as we'd expect, absolutely nothing happens. So how do we make something happen when we click on this button? Well, we want to create a on-click event listener here. So we're going to say button on click. And we need to make sure this is a JavaScript expression. I'm just going to rename that. I'm going to rename this ahead of time, handle click, and make sure we don't call it. And we saw why in the previous video. We're just going to pass a handle to the function. I'm going to declare that function here, function handle click. And technically we can get the event here, although we're not really going to use it, but I'll just put it there just for sake of kind of consistency. And in here, I'll console.log and I'll say hello there, just like that. Okay, so you can see we're not using the event, but if we did want to grab it, we could absolutely grab it. So I'm going to save that, and then that should reload this component. And if I switch back here to my Chrome and I click on this, we should see hello there nicely printed out, and it will just keep printing out the more that we actually click it. So that's really nice. Perfect. Hopefully that makes sense. Make sure you're comfortable with this, and then you can move on to the next one. Okay, let's take a look at exercise 1. Now for this one, what I want you to do, again, you don't have to create a brand new project. You can just keep creating different files here, and they're all named differently, so you can import them separately, just like we saw with the button. And for this one, we want to create an input.jsx file. This is going to return an input tag or input element. And I want you to put an ID this time inside of that input. This is just regular JSX technically, but if you can imagine just HTML, this is just an input tag that has an ID in it. Okay. Now what I want you to do is I want you to figure out how to make it so that when you type inside this input, because it's going to be just a regular kind of text field, you're going to log out kind of a formatted console log that looks like this. So I want you to format kind of square brackets, the name of the tag, in this case input, and the ID of that tag formatted like this, and then a colon, and then the actual value of that text box. So where in this case, the input value is like what you're actually typing into the text box. So for example, if I type in monkey, first it'll be, it'll show this followed by like an M, then it'll be this followed by an O, M and an O, then MON, etc., right? So this is kind of like a nice little tag that we see in our console to determine what we're seeing, where that log is coming from, and then we actually see the value of that input. And you can try to figure out what kind of event listener. I kind of give you a hint here with the change in the input to figure out how to get that to work. And then as usual, export it and then import it to replace the app, which we did with our button, and then check your browser to make sure that it's actually logging correctly as you'd expect. So just a bit of a step up from our warm-up exercise. Give that a shot, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so I'm going to create another file in our source here. Again, I'm going to reuse the project. I'm just going to call this input.jsx. Now this is going to be a function. I'm going to call this input, and I'm going to export default input. And in here, I want to return a input tag. And in that input tag, I can say type equals text if I want to. It's by default text, but I want to give it an ID of, let's just say input 123. Okay. Actually, let's just make this more realistic. Let's just say username, for example. Okay. So this is going to be the JSX that gets returned. This is a regular input tag from HTML with a type text and an ID attribute on it. Now, what we want to do is make it so that when we type inside this thing, we actually get the value, right? So let's take a look at how we do that. So we know that on input or on change, you can use either or, they're pretty much the exact same thing, actually allows us to create an event that makes it so that when we type, we kind of get that event fired off and we can inspect it and see what's in there. So I'm going to say handle input here. And I know that's going pretty far off the screen, but hopefully you can see that there. I'm going to create that handle input function. So I'm going to say function handle input. And we're going to get the event. This time we do need the event. Okay. And we're going to have some body to our function here. So I'll just put I'll put a to-do in here for now, just to placeholder that. And I'll switch back over to our main.jsx. I'll import our input from /input.jsx, and I'll switch this to be our input tag. All right, so I'll save that. And I saved my input file as well, I believe. And then we switch back to Chrome, and there we have it. We have our single input tag with our ID in there. And then if we type in here, as we expect for now, nothing's going to happen because we don't have anything running in that actual function for the event handler. Okay, so what we want is the, where was it? It was right here. So we want to actually console log, let me go back to my exercise here. I'll just copy this here over so it's a bit easier to see. So we want to console log something that looks like this. Okay. Now I'm going to do this kind of the naive way first, and then we're going to look at how we can do this kind of in a better way. So I'm going to say const, I'll just say log for now, and I'll make this a template string. And for now, I'll just hard code this. I'll say input, and I'll say ID equals, and in this case, I think it's username, and I'll put a colon, and then in here, we need to put something, because we don't know what the value is. So let's think about it. What is the value of the text, this input text box as we're typing in it? Well, let's look at this really quick. I'm just going to console.log the event as we type in this box and save that file and see what happens. So I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to maybe just, you notice I actually kept what I have typed in there. So I'm going to add something in here, a D, and we get our input event there. I'm going to open that up, and we can see that we have kind of all these different properties in there, which is great, which is what we expect. Usually what we're interested in when it comes to an input like this, we're probably interested in the target, which is this input right here. You can see the DOM node itself, so we have access to the DOM node. So let's open that up. And this is a regular input DOM node. So if I open that, it does have some React stuff in there as well added to it by the library. And if we scroll down to the very bottom, we'll probably have to expand this a little bit more, very bottom. The one that we're interested in is, where is it? Input.target.value. Okay, so you can see that these are getters and setters, but value is what we need, and we have a way to get it and a way to set it, which is a function, but that will get us that property out of this target node. Now, let's see what happens if we actually log that out. You can also see that really quick before we switch over, we have the type in here of this thing. We have the tag name of this thing, and we also have, if I scroll up here, it's the very top, past all the listeners. Where is it? Looking for attributes. This is just going to show you how we can make this a bit more dynamic. If I open that up, you can see that we have type attribute in here and we have the ID attribute in here. And you can see that the value of this or the name, all here are information that we'll probably be able to use to make this a bit more dynamic. Okay, now let's switch back here and let's, instead of logging E, let's log e.target.value. Let's see what that gets us. So I'll clear this console here and I'll type in again here, and looks like we actually get the value that we expect as we're typing that out, right? There we go. So that's working nicely. So let's actually create this string really quick. So if I say const input value equals e.target.value, and I'll just get rid of that really quick and comment this one back in. This is going to be the input value that I just made. Don't have to create a separate constant for this if you don't want, but I'll just do that for now. And then I'll console.log out this log that I've created. Okay. So I'm just putting this e.target.value in here, which should be whatever we're typing out. And then I'm hard coding all this part for now, and we'll change that shortly. Now, if I clear my console and I start typing in here, we can see that that works as expected. So that's pretty cool, right? That's really nice. Now, how do we make this slightly more dynamic before we go to the next exercise? Well, we saw that technically we had the tag name in here, right? So let me just show you that again really quick. If I console.log E as well, and I come back in here, we can, let me just clear this console really quick. We can see that e.target, we have e.target, and then we have, there's different names. So there's like node name, there's tag name, there's a whole bunch of different things. Let's see, QRS, T tag name right here, right, for HTML elements. So we can use that instead if we want. So I could actually say, for example, const tag name is equal to e.target.tag name, right? Now, how do we get the ID? Well, we could say const ID is equal to e.target. Well, what do we need from the target to get this attribute? We can see in here that if we scroll up to the very, very top, that this is in the attribute list, QRST attributes, and we can get anything in an attribute list on a DOM node. In this case, a named node map for these attributes, we can do get. So we can say dot attributes, or we can do either way really. We can say dot get. I think it's get attribute, and we can grab the ID in this case. So I could replace all this with tag name here. And there's a couple of ways to do this. You can index into it and all that kind of stuff. I'll just do get attribute to do that. And I'll say tag name here, and then ID is equal to, we could even grab ID dynamically if you want. You could actually spread out all the different attributes in here. You can do that as an exercise if you like. You can do all sorts of really fun stuff here. I'll just put ID simply like that, and I'll comment this console log out. Now that was quite a lot, and I'll switch back in a second just so you can see the code, but I'll actually start typing in here, and you can see that that works just as we'd expect, with everything now being dynamic from this input. And we could actually use this function for other types if we wanted to, and it would work as we'd expect, which is pretty awesome. Okay, now let me switch back to the code so hopefully you can see that. So we're just pulling these things out of the target, right? Just to really show you that the target, really, most people just look at the value, but it's really just a DOM node. We have access to everything in there, which is why the DOM API and knowing the DOM API is really, really valuable in order to actually figure out how these things work. Okay, cool. Hopefully that one was interesting. Let's take a look at exercise 2. Okay, so for this one, again, you can create a new project if you like, but you can just reuse the project, which I'm going to do. Create a grades.jsx file that has a component that returns a table element. Okay. Now, tables are less widely used, but still useful, and there are places where they're fantastic to use, and you just got to be careful with the mobile views and things like that, because sometimes they can get weirdly stretched if you don't CSS them properly. So I'd like you to create a table that has 3 columns. Okay, and so effectively in the head of this table, we were going to have 3 columns. We're going to have subject, mark, and grade. Okay, so subject is going to be like a school subject, so like math, science, all that kind of stuff. Mark is going to be a number between 0 and 100. So you can imagine that you're in school and you get some kind of mark like 80 or 60 or something. And then grade is going to be the letter grade. So again, depending on kind of your school system, this might change. You might have a slightly different kind of format for all this. I'm just going to go kind of with what I went through, which is kind of the North American way of going through this, and do like A, B, and C and things like that. So feel free to change this and modify this for what makes sense for you as well. But once you have that built out, so that's just the head, I want you to add at least 5 rows of data to this table, right? So like 5 different entries basically into for each of these headings. So just to kind of give you a demo of, well, not a demo, but like a visual of what that would be like. Your table eventually is going to look like something like this, but with 5 rows. I don't know. I could have done 5, I guess. I just did 3, but you get the idea, right? So like, C math, C5, and then C, and then you can just create a whole bunch of these. Right? And then feel free to do more than 5 if you like. I put 5 here for a reason, at least, just to make it annoying if you were to do this in a specifically not correct way. So the tricky part here, and this can be either easier for you or quite challenging. I'd like you to make it so that when you click on any of the table data cells, which means these ones right here, okay, so when I'm clicking on math, or I click on A+, or I click on 77, right, any of these data cells that you're actually inputting, the rows, I want you to make it so that it logs out the value inside that cell. So for example, if I clicked on math, it would log out math. If I clicked on B, it would log out B, etc., etc. Okay, so how would you do that in an efficient way? That's the key to solving this problem. And in order to really make this quote unquote simple, you're going to want to make sure you use event delegation. So you can do this with one event listener instead of like 3 times 5, which is like 15 of them or more if you had more rows. Okay, so regardless of how many rows you have in this table, you could make this work with just one event listener. So give that a shot, and then you can do the same steps as before. Oops, I realized this should be 5 and 6, but you should export this function correctly into main.jsx, and then reload your browser to make sure you can actually see the table, and this loads as you expect. So definitely a complicated one if you haven't seen event delegation before. I have a video on the channel about that if you need help with that, but give this your best shot, and then we'll go through a potential solution together. All right, so to start, I'll create this file. So in source, I'll create table.jsx, and I'll just call this table, just like that. And I'll do export default table. Nope, got too excited there, calling the function. Now I want to return some JSX here, and this is going to be quite large. So I'm going to make kind of a multi-line JSX here. This is going to be a table. Now I always forget how to do these tables, so forgive me if I mess this up. I think we need like a T head, and then we have after the T head, I think we have a T body. And inside the T head, I think technically you're supposed to have a T row, table row. I think it's a table row. I think it's table row. I always forget how to do this. You know what? I'm going to Google this really quick because I always forget this. Table in HTML, and I'm just going to go table basics just so that we can actually see how this works. And where is this? Table data. So TR. Oh, TR. That's the one. TR, TD. Let me zoom in on this so you can see me fail with tables. So that allows you to actually add data to each table, which we're going to do next. And here we go. We have a table row, and inside there we have TD, and you can make table heads and bodies respectively. And you can even get really fancy, I believe, and do like multi-row like headers and all that kind of cool stuff. So this is TR, not row. There you go. See, I haven't done tables in a while. And inside of there we have our TD. So for our head, we know that we have subject. We have, let me create 3 of these. We have, what did I say? Mark and grade, right? And then what we have inside our body is the same thing. So, but this time we're going to have kind of 3 sets of this. So instead of the headings in here, we're going to have the actual data. So for the first one, let's just do math. So this is going to correspond to subject. And then for mark, let's just say I get 74. And then I'm not actually sure what that is. Let's just say that's like a B+. Okay, so I'm going to copy this a few times. So 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me just replace this really quick. I'll just say science. I'll just change some of these grades around. I'll say 60 something. Let's just do C+ for there. This can be art. And let's just say I'm good at art in my dreams. And let's just do a C- here. Actually, that's not a C-. That makes no sense at all. This is an A+. Let's do, well, what are some fun courses? What are your favorite courses? You know, once I had a woodworking course, that was a lot of fun. I don't remember what I got in there. Let's just, I don't think I did very well. I tried to make a plane. I remember trying to fly that plane. That was a lot of fun back in the day. And then let's just say, I don't know, dancing class. I would love to do dancing. I hope to sign up for some lessons shortly. But right now, people would argue I'm not very good. You know, let's give myself an F in this for now. I'm going to work on that so I can get better at dancing. That's my goal. Okay, so we have all of these in here and in our table, and then we have our table head. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, what I'll do is I have that exported, so I'm going to import this into main. I'm going to import table from /table. And the data in the table doesn't really matter too much, honestly. Put whatever you like, as you'd expect. The event listening part of this is what really matters the most. So if I switch back over here, we can see that we have our table, which is in here. That's our table right there. And we have our T head and our T body. And then we have our header. And then we have our body where each of these rows has their own individual data. So that's really nice. Great. So right now, if we click on these, obviously nothing's going to happen because we don't have any event listeners. This is a very basic table. Okay, now let me switch back here. And I want you to think, imagine that we had like 100 of these rows, right? One solution is to add a event listener to each TD. Right? But as I just mentioned, if we had 100 of these, that would be very wasteful when it comes to event listeners, right? The other thing we could do is add it to TR and then kind of go into the TD and grab the one that was clicked maybe. That might be kind of complicated because then it's like you got to do the target, you got to go into there's a whole bunch of extra stuff you'd have to do. And you still would have to figure out how to add that to each of these ones, right? So each TR would need one. And if we have 100 of them, well, that's just 100, right? So it's a bit better than having like 300, but it's not much better, right? So we probably don't want to add it to TRs. Well, what if we go one level up? What if we add it to either the T body or the table itself? Well, the T body would allow us to kind of intercept events as they come, in this case on the bubbling side, unless we wanted to intercept it on the capture side, from anything in this table. Right? So in this case, if I add on the body, that means I can listen to events that are triggered from anywhere inside the table body. Very similar to the idea of the TR, but the TR would be lackluster in this case because we'd have to add it to every single row where we have so many different rows and we want it to be dynamic so that no matter how many rows you have, for example, if we're getting this data dynamically and we had 1,000 rows, for example, or it's split up over many pages, we would want this to still work correctly. So my solution is going to use what's called event delegation, which allows us to add an event listener at the highest point in the tree that contains all the things that we're interested in listening to. So in this case, I'm going to add it to the body because I don't actually want to listen to anything in the head here. I just want to grab the math or the B or the 74 and things like that. So I'm going to say an on click, and I'm going to do a handle click. And I'll get better at naming these later. For now, I'll just keep it consistent just so that we're all on the same page and there's not too many new things at once. And in here, I'll say function handle click, and we get an E. And that's going to be our event. So I'm going to console.log that event just so to make sure this actually works correctly. So notice I added this on click not to each TD or each TR. I added it to the actual T body. If I save that and switch back here, something happen? I think not. Let's see if that works. I click on math or I click on B and I get that event actually triggered. And if I open up that event, what we can actually see is that this is a click event. And if I open up the target right here, you can see that the target is the TD that I clicked on for this event. Okay, so target dot, in this case, hopefully value, if I go down to the very bottom, will actually give us, where is it? TUV, target TD dot, I guess it's not value. Sorry, not value in this case, but that would be an input. This would be target dot, where is it? LMNOPQRSST text content right there, math. Okay, so each node is slightly different. I always forget sometimes. So used to using value, but in this case, it's the text content because it's not an input node. So if I close this one off and we actually open up the second one here, we'll see that the target hopefully should be the other TD, right? Notice how this is the B, not the math that I clicked on. And if I open that target up and I scroll down to LMNOPQRST, text content is that B right there, which is the letter grade for that cell. So that works quite nicely, right? So what do we need to do? Well, we want to log E and then dot target dot text content. Okay, not value, because there's no value for a TD node. It's a text content. So now if I save that and I switch back here, if I click on math, I should get math. If I click on woodworking, I should get woodworking. If I click on A+, I should get A+. 64, I get 64. Isn't that cool? Look at that. So this is event delegation in action. If I click anything up here, mark or grade, nothing happens. If I click anything down here, nothing happens because those are not part of the T body. And we know what's in the T body is exactly right here, as you can see when I have highlighted in the Elements tab. So all the events are being delegated to the T body, and that has access to the whole event, which has access to the target, which is where we actually fired the event off of in the event targeting phase, event capturing phase, targeting phase, and then the bubbling phase. In React, by default, when we do stuff like this, on click or on anything, that is in the bubbling phase. And in order to add something in the capturing phase, we just add capture to the end like that if we do need that, although it is a bit more rare that you would need to explicitly access something in the capturing phase, and most of the time it's fine to grab it in the bubbling phase, most of the time. Okay, so that one was a bit trickier. Hopefully now that you've seen it, it makes sense how that actually works. If this is still confusing to you, take a look at the event bubbling and delegation that I have in the DOM series. Okay, now let's take a look at the last exercise. Okay, now I'm going to give you a bit of a warning. This one is the most involved one and a bit more challenging, of course, as you've seen them being ramped up here as we're going through these. However, extremely crucial for you to practice this one and really get a good feel for how this works, because this is something we're going to be doing repeatedly over and over again in React, is working with forms. So let's take a look at how this one works. I'd like you to again create a new project for React or just reuse the existing one. I want you to create a contact form.jsx component this time, and this is going to return a form element. Okay, so before we return the table, now we're going to return a form. And I want that form to have the following items in it. We're going to have a text input for the first name. And I want you to give this a placeholder attribute as well as a name attribute or property for this tag. Okay, make sure you have both. And then same thing for last name. So a text input for last name. So give it a placeholder and a name. And then same thing for age. But this is going to be a number input instead of a text input. And I want you to give it a placeholder and a name property as well. And then below all of these, I want you to add a button of type submit. And you can put whatever text you want in there, like submit. So that this form really has these three main elements in it, plus the actual submit button. Okay. Now, what I want you to figure out is how can we make it so that when you submit the form, which is when I click that submit button, I want you to prevent the default form behavior, which is in HTML. If you click on a form, by default, it refreshes the page. We want to stop that refresh from happening and take complete control of what we do with that data. So I want you to first figure out how to stop that default behavior. And then I want you to log out the first name, last name, and the age that was submitted in those forms. Now, if you've used React before and you're kind of using this as a refresher, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, I'll use a ref or I'll use state and all that kind of stuff. So you are not allowed to use that for this exercise, okay? You've only able to use the tools up to this point, which is just regular components, JSX, events, and JavaScript. Okay, now this sounds kind of crazy, but I really want us to get a feel for how powerful the DOM itself is and how it's different from React and how we can use these two in conjunction together to build really powerful applications. Now, once you have that working, export it, import it into your app, make sure it actually loads up in your browser and shows. And I have a couple of hints down here for you. Think of how to prevent default in events. You can Google for that. I remember that you have access to the form element in the event. Okay, so it's a bit of a hint there. And the final hint for you is that you can use what's called the FormData Web Api and you can look this up on documentation like MDN to actually get a feel for how you can more easily deal with this kind of form data. All right, so give that a shot and then we will go through a solution together. Okay, let's take a look at this. So this is the most challenging one. So if you had trouble with that, don't fret at all. Very complex because there's a lot of kind of moving parts here and some potentially new APIs if you haven't seen those before. So I'm going to call this contact form .jsx. And in here, I'm going to create a function. I'll call this contact form. And I'm going to export default contact form. There we go. And in here, I said I want to return a bunch of JSX. So I'm going to say this is going to be a form. And inside of there, I'm going to have an input. Type is text. And I want to have a name is equal to first name. And I'll have a placeholder as well. And this is going to go off the screen, I know. So let me just kind of wrap it around here. Placeholder is equal to first name. I'll actually make this name camel case, sorry. I always get confused with which is which. Placeholder is what I want to see in there, and the name is going to be what we can access this property in, which you'll see in a second. Oh, so it's going to move that for me. Oh, that's annoying. Okay. I'm going to make one more of those. This one is going to be last name. And this is going to be last name here. And then I'm going to make one more of those, and this is going to be type of number. And this is going to be the age, and this placeholder here is going to be the age as well. Actually, this is going to be a number, so it should be like, let's just say 10 for the age. And then we're going to have a button, and this is going to be submit. And let me just add a emoji for fun here, like that. And in this button, we're going to say type of submit, and that is everything. So no events in here yet. Let's just make sure that the basic structure of this form actually renders and displays and there's no issues with it. So I'm going to switch back to main.jsx here. I'm going to import contact form. Ooh, not context. Contact form from /contact form.jsx. And I'm going to replace this here with contact form. Okay, so now that's the only thing that we're rendering is our contact form. We're going to see a bit more in the next video on component composition of really how all this kind of works together, because that'll lead us to things like props and other things. But for now, I think we've seen this in a couple of videos, and hopefully that just makes sense that we want to render that form. Now, if I switch back here, what we'll see is our elements in our form are 1, 2, 3 inputs, as well as the button for type submit. But notice that as I type in here, for example, and then I click on submit, the page actually refreshes and I actually lose everything that was in here, and the console actually also reloads as well. Okay, so we want to prevent that. And we want to also take a look at what the user actually entered. So how do we do that? Well, if we switch back to our contact form, all forms have a submit event, right? So we can do an on submit, and we're going to call a handle submit function. Okay. And up here again, I'm going to call function handle submit. And this is going to take an event. And let's just log out that event for now and see what we get. Now this is going to be an issue again because of the reloading, but I want to show you what that's actually like. So I'm going to save that, switch over, I'm going to enter some data in here, and I expect that to log over here. And if I click on submit, it logs really quickly and then disappears. Hopefully you saw that, right? And that's because when we reload the page, we lose kind of all the console data that was there. Okay. Now, we want to stop that from happening. So how do we stop that from happening? Well, we saw in the events video in the DOM before that we can stop the default behavior of the forms or any event that is using prevent default on the event object. So I'm going to first e.prevent default, just like that. Okay. And hopefully if I do this, it prevents the default behavior right away, then I can console log the event out. So let's try this again. I'm going to put a bunch of stuff in here, a bunch of stuff in here. Change that a little bit and click on submit. And now we actually have not only all this content still stuck in there without it kind of getting wiped out, but also our event actually shows as well. And if we look at this, we can see that we have event and then we have our target, which is our form right here. Okay. So that's the form. That's what we need. And you can see that inside of this form is all of these individual elements, and we have a way to actually grab those. Now, there's a lot of different ways to grab data out of a form. I'm going to show you probably what is the like best practice method, which is literally the built-in way in the DOM on how to access form data. And hopefully you either learn something new or you can see a couple of cool new ways to actually visualize that as well. So I'm going to switch back to over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called a form data object and pass it the form. So I'm going to do this and I'll show you the API in a second. I'll say const fd for form data is equal to a new form data. Now this is not something from React. This is something in the regular browser DOM API, which we have access to, just like we have access to things like local storage and the window element and all that kind of stuff. So I'll show you in a second what I mean. So the constructor for this allows us to pass in a form node, and we can actually, it'll turn it into this form data object that we can use much easier. So the form node is in e.target. Okay, so e.target is the actual form, which is what we saw right here, right? E.target is a whole entire form. And it turns out if we pass that to this constructor for form data, we can actually get a form data object back. So let me just console.log that out and I'll show you form data right there. And if I kind of reload the page here and I'll type in some stuff here, change the age, we actually get this form data object. Now you're probably wondering, that's weird. It looks empty. There's nothing in there. So I'll show you how we can actually get the values out of this and log it out nicely in a second. But before we do that, I'm going to switch back to Google here, and I want to show you form data on MDN. So I'm going to Google for form data on MDN, and we get this form data page right here. If you look at it up on Google, I highly encourage you to play around with this API. It's extremely valuable and very, very powerful and makes it working with forms just much, much easier and uses the built-in kind of standardized web methods. So what we're using is this constructor right here. So I'm just going to open this in a new tab really quick and I'll show you in a second. But on this form data object, once we have it constructed, we can do all sorts of cool things here, right? You can see that we have ways to add stuff to it if we want. We can delete stuff in it. We can go over all the entries in there, which we'll actually use in a second. We can get specific entries, for example, like the by name, like the first name or the last name. We can check if it even has anything at all, and a whole bunch of other really cool things. So I opened the constructor over here, which was, again, this first link right here. The constructor for form data creates a new form data object. And it turns out you can create it in 3 different ways. We use this way right here, which is the one that says new form data and passing it the actual form. So in this case, you can see this is a form element, and it will be populated with the form's current keys and values using the name property of each of the elements for the keys and their value for the values. It will also deal with file inputs as well, which is really cool. So that's why I mentioned I'd like you to add a name property onto all of these so that we can actually see, or name attribute, so we can actually see that logged out in this object in a second. So there are a few ways to actually get this logged out. To start, if I come back here, I just want to show you that we're going to look at this way to start, returning an iterator of the key value pairs, and we can go over those. So if I switch back over here, instead of just logging it out, what I'll do is I'll do for const each entry of fd.entries, like that. Okay, so we can call the entries method on this FormData object, and we can actually get back the key value pairs. And I'm going to console.log out the entry. Okay, and this is coming straight from that MDN Web API, and this will just loop through everything in that object, and we can through the iterator, and we can actually grab each entry out. So if I switch back over here to my page here, let me just reload just so I have everything from scratch. Let's just say my first name is Mr. Monkey, and I'm 6 years old, and I click on submit. What we'll see over here on the right hand side is really cool, right? We get back an array for each of these, and we see that we have first name Mr., last name Monkey, age of 6, right? That's exactly what we need. So that's a really neat way to actually grab the data that we need out of this FormData object. We can also just grab specific keys. For example, I could grab out just the first name or the age or the last name. I can even add to this object kind of secret keys if I really need to as well. Now, I'd like you to check this out as well. I just want to show you a couple more methods to actually do this. So this is method 1 to do it. If you want to get fancy with spread syntax, you can also do this. I can do console.log, and I can spread out into an array FormData. I always do FormData.entries like that, and make sure a spread has the 3 over there. So this is spreading out, iterating over these, but into an array. And if I clear this console and I try this again, what we'll see is we get an array now of each of these values in there, which is kind of nice. So that's one other method that I can show you. And the last method I want to show you, which is one of my favorites to actually work with this. Hopefully this blows your mind a little bit. We can actually use console.table. I don't know if you've seen this one before. And what we can do is we can say object.entries. So we can enumerate the entries, so the keys and values of this FormData object, right? So let me save that really quick, and I'll just show you this, and then we'll take a look at the code really quick again together. I'll clear the console here. I'll click on submit. Did I mess that up there? Console.table of not entries, from entries. Sorry, from entries. That's the one I wanted. I'm so used to typing object.entries that I forget that we can actually construct something with from entry. So this constructs a new object out of this and puts it in a table format. That was anticlimactic, but hopefully now, moment of truth, fingers crossed, and there we go. All right, so check that out. That's pretty cool, right? Like, look at that. We have a nice little formatted version here of, you can even like sort it. I don't actually know what the sorting criteria is there, but there you go. We got age 6, last name Monkey, first name of Mr. Okay, and that's coming from right over here. So a lot of really cool stuff we can do with forms. Very, very powerful. This was kind of veering a little bit a tangent into form data, but it's so critical, and these forms come up so often when we're working with React that it's important to get a good understanding of how these works. Now, there are like dozens of other ways to actually get this to work in React, especially once you start adding things like refs and state, which we'll look at in next videos. But this is the preferred method, really, because it really uses the built-in web APIs, and it's much easier to kind of read. As you can see, like literally we just parse the entire form in this one line of code, and we can grab anything in there that we want, or append to it, or remove from it, or check if it has things that we need or not. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. I know that was quite a lot. This particular exercise definitely was the most challenging. So if it took you a while, or you had to kind of watch this video to get the answer before you try, don't really fret about that too much. It's as long as you can kind of go through this and it kind of makes sense. And I would say this part is the part that probably is the most familiar, hopefully for most of you. That's all that really matters. Take a look a little bit at the FormData API just so you have that back in your mind, so that when we use forms in the future, it makes a bit of sense. but a very, very powerful tool. And most importantly, how you can actually use this in conjunction with these event listeners in React to actually get things to work as we need. So what we would do normally, if we were using this in an application, we might take this form and we would send it off as a post request or something to our server, and then our server would be able to parse it out nice and easily and actually handle that data in a standardized format. Okay, I hope you found this video valuable. If you did, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. What we're going to do in the next video together is I'm super excited to go over component composition, which is our ability to kind of understand a bit more of how kind of this stuff works. Like, how is this actually working behind the scenes? What powers and superpowers does it give us if we can actually make components have children that are other components, just like we do in the DOM? Because right now we've just been really working with one component at a time, but we can actually compose these together to create entire trees of elements where each element is its own small independent subset of functionality, which is really the whole point of React at the end of the day for the most part. So I'm super excited to get to that section. I'll see you in that one. See you later.